Welcome to Stuck in the Gravel. You're here with
Daniel
and Chloe. Today we will be discussing the start of the Formula 1 season held in Melbourne, Australia.
First of all, we would like to extend our tributes to the F1 team owner of Jordan. Eddie Jordan, or also known as EJ. One brilliant team owner who gave the likes of Martin Brundle, Ralf Schumacher, Heinz-Harald Frentzen a chance to make their names in Formula 1, and then eventually taking on the 1996 Formula 1 world champion Damon Hill. They later were successful with a 1-2 finish at the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, with Damon Hill taking the win and Ralf Schumacher second.
Stefano Domenicali, Formula 1 CEO, has released a statement. We are deeply saddened to hear about the sudden loss of Eddie Jordan. With his inexhaustible energy, he always knew how to make people smile, remaining genuine and brilliant at all times. Eddie has been the protagonist of an era of F1 and he will be deeply missed. In this moment of sorrow, my thoughts and those of the entire Formula 1 family are with his family and loved ones. Now let's go on to the 2025 Australian Grand Prix. Starting off with qualifying. Saturday's qualifying session was nothing short of spectacular. The McLaren drivers fought off fierce competition from the likes of Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc and George Russell, with just a few tenths separating the top positions after the first runs from everybody. With the pressure on, Lando Norris delivered a stunning lap to take pole position by just 0.08 of a second over his papaya teammate Oscar Piastri in a nail-biting Q3 session. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, as we saw the infamous prancing horse struggling, where both drivers couldn't set anything near to what everyone was expecting with the car.
Overall, the shocks thrown into the mix during the first qualifying session was newly promoted to the Red Bull Racing Honda team Liam Lawson, whom we all expected by bare minimum to get through to Q2 or even Q3, but he failed to reach Q2 with being 0.5 off the cut-off zone, placing him P18 on the starting grid for his first ever Grand Prix with the past champions.
As well as this, newly promoted Mercedes hotshot Andrea Kimi Antonelli couldn't quite find his feet with the one-lap pace around the high-tyre degrading Albert Park street circuit. Having a lot of the Formula 1 community highly rating him, it unfortunately wasn't his day, placing himself a rather unlucky 9,000th off P15 and Q2. But what we can take from this is that Saturday isn't the day where results come from. An appreciation message towards driver number 6, Isaac Hadjar, for doing his job, proving people wrong in the V-Carb, qualifying P11 and 600ths off his first ever Q3 appearance.
Now, moving on to race day. The race itself on Sunday delivered all the drama fans could have hoped for. As the lights went out, the field surged into turn 1, with Lando Norris making a blistering start from pole position and was able to cover off both Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen, where Max eventually found grip around the outside on the track to pass Oscar. Whilst drivers like Kimi Antonelli and Jack Doohan were almost in an early crash, whereas Jack Doohan was caught up. The opening laps were chaotic as the field jostled for position in the tight corners of the Albert Park street circuit.
The race was held on the 16th of March 2025 and was scheduled to start at 3 o'clock local time, UTC plus 11, but was delayed to 3:15 due to Isaac Hadjar's crash on the formation lap. The race was set to be run 58 laps, but was shortened by 1 lap due to the aborted start procedure. The race was held under changing intermediate conditions after an aborted start due to Isaac Hadjar crashing his racing balls. During the formation lap, which saw a 10-minute delay, Lando Norris in the McLaren led a majority of the race. He briefly lost the lead to Max Verstappen when Norris and teammate Oscar Piastri lost control in the intermediate conditions, with Norris boxing shortly afterwards. Having lost control, Piastri was beached for a short time before he freed himself, dropping to 13th and later recovering to 9th after a late pass on Ferrari's Lewis Hamilton at the famous left and right-hander of turns 11 and 12. Where some considered this move overly aggressive, as Hamilton had lost the wing plate on the front wing but wasn't substantial enough to be classed as aggressive and dangerous driving. Others consider this as a perfectly acceptable move, and that the damage was sustained was from an earlier on when Charles and Lewis got too close for comfort.
Verstappen in the Red Bull was trailing Norris as the race reached its closing stages. Norris kept Verstappen behind to win the Grand Prix, bringing McLaren its first win in Australia since Jenson Button did so for the team in 2012. In doing so, Norris led the Drivers' Championship for the first time in his career and broke Verstappen's reign of consecutive days leading the championship, which he had held since the 2022 Spanish Grand Prix. Having been briefly penalised, dropping him to 5th before his team lodged an appeal, which was upheld, Andrea Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes recovered 12 places from 16th place to finish in 4th. And his points finish made him the second youngest Formula 1 driver to have ever scored a Formula 1 point. 6 retirements were observed, all for accidents on the track, for which 3 safety car periods were observed: Hadjar during the formation lap, Jack Doohan for Alpine, Carlos Sainz for Williams, Fernando Alonso for Aston Martin, Gabriel Bortoleto for KIC Sauber, and Verstappen's teammate Liam Lawson. Sainz's teammate Alex Albon scored a highest finish of 5th for Williams, the first time the team has done such since the 2021 Belgian Grand Prix, where George Russell had finished 2nd. Alonso's teammate Lance Stroll finished in 6th, and Sauber's Nico Hülkenberg in 7th, placing them above Ferrari, who had a disappointing season opener, with Charles Leclerc finishing in 8th and Hamilton in 10th. The Haas duo of Oliver Behrman and Esteban Ocon rounded off the bottom 2.
So on to the race results. In first position we had Lando Norris with McLaren. Second was Max with Red Bull. Third was George Russell with Mercedes. In 4th place was Andrea Kimi Antonelli with Mercedes. And in 5th was Alexander Albon with Williams. Andrea Kimi Antonelli was handed a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe release that was later removed due to the fact that they found he was not unsafely released into the path of the KIC Sauber. So, how has this affected the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships? Lando is at the top with 25 points, followed by Max Verstappen with 18 points. George Russell is in 3rd with 15 points, closely followed by his teammate Kimi Antonelli with 12 points, and also followed by Williams driver Alexander Albon with 10 points. McLaren are in 1st with 27 points, as well as Mercedes being in 2nd with 27 points. In 3rd are Red Bull with 18 points, and Williams are 4th with 10 points, and Aston Martin 5th with 8 points.
Should we talk about certain things that happened during the race with McLaren's so-called team order scandal controversy?
Can do.
Have you got any thoughts on that particularly? More so with the fact that it was, for me, I think it was more reasonable to keep Oscar behind. Lando had qualified first. He went into qualifying leading. He's led most of the race. And we know that McLaren have had issues like this in the past, such as Hungary. And for me, I think, okay, yes, Oscar was faster for a brief moment. The moment he caught up was when the McLarens were both catching up to the back markers. It was safer to keep Oscar behind, in my opinion, and to clear the cars first, and then to let them race. But it took Oscar Piastri a little, misjudgment of going around the corner, and that threw him off, and he lost, a good 2 seconds on Lando. So effectively, he had lost he fell out of the DRS range, and it just wasn't there. I think, personally, people need to chill out on the, Lando this, Oscar that. Team orders were there for the time being whilst they was getting past back markers. And if you look at it in the team's perspective, it's to maximise the points they can get. And if I'm totally honest, it was the right decision.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they didn't do it out of a place of Lando being a first driver or wanting to keep Oscar back. I think from the team's perspective, they probably just wanted to keep both drivers in instead of risking any accidents while catching up with back markers and stuff. So I think it was a quite smart call in terms of for the team. I think it's Formula One at the end of the day, and obviously the whole point is for them to race, but it needs to be, it's both the mix of team sport and independent. So the team are just going to look out for themselves.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of the way it works. The team looks out for themselves, the drivers look out for themselves. And at the end of the day, team orders go. McLaren made the call, and it worked out in the end for Lando, not for Oscar, but like you said,
Yeah.
it was a misjudgment and it happened. Oscar put up a really good fight of getting out of the gravel and carrying on.
Yeah.
And do you know what? Credits to him for that one, because I think that ninth place was well deserved, especially in front of the home crowd. Like, might not have been a podium finish, but he earned that place.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But going back to that, it's more so the fact that people are being blinded by the fact the people, like the television coverage of F1 don't broadcast the radio messages as they're actually happening. It's more so that they come maybe a minute or two later. And I think people need to stop being blinded by it, because obviously people think they know best, don't they? They're not actually the teams with their headsets. They can't really talk, but, I mean, as much as them both going through the gravel, Lando picked up quite a lot of floor damage that was going to mess with his aero. So to be fair, to finish, around about 5/10 in front of Max to win the race, if one lap extra and, that could have been it for Lando. That floor damage really did cause some issues. As well as that, it's like, you can't really predict how the race is going to play out. You've got to, it's something you've got to take one step at a time. But, we noticed that Oscar nearly flew straight back onto the track in front of Max, taking Max out, but, that didn't happen, so very grateful for that. And at that moment, Lando knew straight away, get in the pits and, get their inters on.
Yeah. So now let's take a look at the biggest stories making waves in Formula One this past week.
For team updates, according to Kim Illman, an F1 photographer who looks for as much insider information as possible, he states, aircraft technical issues out of Australia have led to big delays in freight arriving in Shanghai for 4 teams. This freight is not expected into Shanghai until late this afternoon or early evening, which is at least a day and a half behind schedule. The 4 tech-affected teams are Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, but I understand the other teams have also been affected in less ways. It's unsure what effect this will have on the teams getting car on track by Friday, although to many people's hopes, 8 cars from 4 teams were missing from yesterday's midday garage lineup, delayed after an aircraft went technical. Those cars were delivered late Wednesday afternoon and teams worked well into the early morning to prepare them for today.
On to the technical updates. As has been previously communicated, between the end of the 2024 season and the start of the 2025 season, the FIA exercised the authority it is granted under Article 3.15.1 of the technical regulations to introduce either new or more challenging low deflection tests for the front wing from race 9 of the Spanish Grand Prix, the upper rear wing and the beam rear wing. In addition, the FIA requested to the teams to use cameras in free practice sessions to monitor the on-track deformations exhibited by the cars during the Australian Grand Prix. Having analysed footage from the rear wing deformations combined to the static deflections measured in the FIA garage in Melbourne, the FIA has concluded that sufficient grounds exist for a tougher test to be introduced from the forthcoming Chinese Grand Prix on the upper rear wing. More specifically, Article 3.15.17, introduced in 2025, states that if 75 kilograms of vertical load is applied on either extremity of the rear wing mainplane, the distance between the mainplane and the flap, also known as the slot gap, must not vary by more than 2 millimetres from the forthcoming Grand Prix in Shanghai. This limit will be reduced to 0.5 millimetres. But due to the short notice for Shanghai, only a tolerance of 0.25 millimetres will be added to this new limit. The teams were informed of this revised test early Monday 17th of March. The FIA wishes to further confirm that during the Melbourne event, all cars tested against the requirements of Article 3.15.17 and found to comply. Therefore, all cars raced in Melbourne were deemed to be legal.
Moving on to the driver news. Over the last week, there's been a lot of buzz surrounding the performance of Andrea Kimi Antonelli after securing a P4 finish at the Australian Grand Prix. They've been touted as the potential contender for the Drivers' World Championship in the near future. Meanwhile, he was involved in a controversial incident during the race, leading to a penalty. After the race was finished, Mercedes were quick to download the footage from the onboard camera of the number 12 car to appeal the penalty. It is not often that a penalty appeal typically is overturned, but in this case, they were successful and were reinstated the P4 position that, unfortunately for Alexander Albon and Williams, was retaken, but for them, they will still be happy with a P5 finish, considering how much of a wreck last season was. Max Verstappen was leading the World Drivers' Championship for 1,029 days, and this is the longest time ever a driver has ever led the championship. This stat could be one of the ones that will never ever be broken.
On to upcoming developments. There's also been a lot of chatter about the new rule changes coming into play later in the season, including the flexi wings for multiple teams. Red Bull suspects some teams are still using it. Teams are already working on adapting their cars to comply with the updated regulations.
Any thoughts on that? Do you believe the flexi wings should be there?
I don't know.
I think they should be.
I think they should be, but I think the thing from that I notice is that a lot of complaints come from Red Bull when it comes to car, like things on the cars and structures and that sort of stuff. A lot of complaints come from Red Bull. So, and it tends to be when they're struggling. Yeah. So, that might be something to note for the season, especially for the start.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
I personally do think that they need to stop clamping down on new technology that teams are coming up with, because it's what makes... Okay, yes, a team can go so far ahead, but the idea of Formula One is it's innovation of the cars, it's how they can be designed, and these sort of loopholes need to be, used into an effect that they can, okay, yes, that flexi wing can give them it's like a second DRS, it can give them an extra, down the track, probably 2-3 tenths maybe, I don't know. It is like a DRS if enough air goes underneath it. But I believe that, we had this same incident with the DAS system that Mercedes used that, rotated the wheels inwards. But I believe that there should be, I think it should not be clamped down on as much as what people are trying. And that they should have the freedom to make whatever they want to make on the cars, as long as it sticks to the rules. Which, to be fair, that it has, but it's just because a couple teams just have to keep complaining.
Yeah. I think I agree with you in terms of, teams should be allowed the freedom to make stuff as long as it complies with any rules and regulations. And it shouldn't just be that because a team's complaining about it, because I think you have to look at that they probably might be complaining because of the fact that they can't master it themselves. But F1's an innovation sport. It's all about development and research and science and that sort of stuff. It's a complex sport as it is anyway, so,
Yep. You happy?
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. I've been Dan.
And I've been Chloe.
And this is Stuck in the Gravel.
The voice of a new generation. This is KIC Radio.